Hi, I'm Jamie Ananda McConaughey. Welcome to the Tantric Life podcast. Today I'm delighted to have joining me on the show my good friend Harmony Hannigan. Harmony is a teacher of Tantra Yoga and a meditation teacher trainer. She's also a retreat leader. She's a breathwork teacher, and she has a lot of experience in Tantra and yoga and meditation. And I'm really excited to have Harmony on the show to talk about, well, let's see what we end up talking about. I've recently been doing her course on the Mahavidyas, the 10 tantric deities. So yeah, let's see where our conversation goes today. Welcome, Harmony. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jamie. It's an absolute pleasure to be here talking to you this morning.
Yes, I'm so excited. We've been planning this for a while, and finally we get to sit down and have a nice relaxed chat about Tantra and yoga and any other things that are going to come up in today's conversation.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see what emerges because, as you know, with these things, we never really know where it's going to take us.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Which is kind of like living the tantric path in a way, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think I quite often I say that when I walk into a retreat or a course, I'll actually say to people, well, really, you've got a program, but I don't actually pretend to follow that program necessarily. It's just for the mind to think that it's going to receive something specific, but really it's about feeling into the energy in the present moment with all the elements that are present and alive, and from really kind of plugging into that, what emerges is actually what is necessary, what's required, and also what is really, yeah, what can actually come alive,
Mm.
and to avoid any staleness or anything that's been pre-planned, which can sometimes just not have that, as you said, tantric essence of juiciness and flowingness.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Gosh. So, Harmony, maybe we could start off if you could tell us a little bit about your background and, how you got into Tantra and what are you doing these days?
Well, that's already a big one to bite off there, but I can start by talking a little bit about my past because I think it's quite unusual, and that might also just set the scene. So well, to begin with, my name is Harmony Peace, so that as you can see, I didn't come from exactly a very typical background. I was born into a very spiritually oriented family. Both of my parents were meditators, and they had, and they still have, a spiritual guide from India. And so, not only was I brought up where the Indian philosophy and was very very present, but they also looked for an education which would be favoring that kind of growth. So I went to school in London in a Vedanta school. So we were learning Sanskrit, Kathak dance, chanting the vows in the mornings, meditating. I received my first initiation when I was at 10. So the meditation practices were actually incorporated into the school program. But like any healthy teenager, obviously I had to rebel and find my own path, really. And I think that in regardless of what tradition you come from, when there is a religious or a spiritual upbringing, it can quite often feel like it's being thrust upon you. So it was necessary for me to actually just kind of break away and be rebellious and try out all of those things that I wasn't supposed to do. And yeah, and eventually what happened there is that I did have my own kind of existential crisis when I was at university, and I was like, I was studying psychology, and I could see that psychology was fascinating, but also wasn't really addressing or giving the answers to a lot of the things that within spirituality, and the philosophy that I was brought up with. There was a lot of those things were already answered, so it made me kind of like look once again towards the Indian philosophy. But actually, really, there was this desire, which was very strong in my inside of me, to say, okay, I need to find this out for myself. I can't be learning it through my parents or through my teachers. It has to be authentic, and it has to be something which really, truly resonates with me. So, as a result of that, I went on, as many people have done, in this kind of self exploration journey to India as soon as I finished university. And yeah, it was fascinating, because I did begin by exploring my parents' philosophy, but for myself, just to feel if there was like an inkling of something on my in my inside. And eventually, when I came to the conclusion that although it was interesting, it wasn't my path. I guess I kind of really implored, or I just spoke to universe and said, just show me what is my way, really. And quite unexpectedly, I found myself in the presence of a teacher who was teaching Tantra Yoga at that point. And I hadn't done so much yoga myself. I'd done a little bit. And suddenly, what I discovered there was what I like to call embodied philosophy. And what I mean by that, it was not only ideas and theories and stories and myths. It was actually about really suddenly awakening a greater sensitivity in the body. And this particular yoga practice is nothing to do with what we generally see today, which is quite often a very fast sequence of very attractive movements. It was actually a very meditative practice where you deepen into this really, really rich depth of sensation. So you begin to recognize very directly um, your own energetic body. And this is really kind of what opened a big door, because this was something I could feel. This was something that I could actually recognize as something alive. And that really just opened the door to my subsequent studies, exploration, and obviously sharing those teachings with other people also. Yeah.
Mm. Wow, that's fascinating. I love that. In some ways, I relate a little bit also to that. I had some similarities in my path. How you said about that you studied psychology, and then you sort of felt that psychology wasn't quite, giving you that fulfillment in that regard. And I remember having a similar kind of feeling about when I studied psychology. And then you went to India and got deeper into tantra. And amazing that this has kind of been sort of with you. It sort of started when you were very young. Really, you've been exposed to these ideas from a very young age, and then so it really started to sort of flourish when you met your tantra teacher in India, right?
Yeah, I think it was something which awakened within me, was this recognition of the ability, or that it's fine to embrace everything. I think that my upbringing was very much around, it was very clear what was right and what was wrong. Um, and even though I went to this very interesting Vedantic school, it was also very Victorian in some ways. It was very strict. And I think that, needing to find something which for me as a child was just so obvious. It's like, you know, everything is an invitation. Everything is an offer to explore, to taste, to discover. And I certainly didn't see things in that same strict right and wrong way. This kind of like imposed morality, which then, as we quite often discover, is actually lip service. And really, those same educators or those same figures are even not even upholding this moral, these ethics that apparently is so fundamental in their way of being. So I found when I was a younger, I discovered there was a lot of incoherence. So when I discovered Tantra, I was like, oh, it's actually not about having these ideals and struggling to uphold and manifest them. It's actually about saying, well, everything is divine. And so even that which is perhaps dirty or unattractive, um, it's not that it's wrong or to be hidden. It's actually another form of divine. And so suddenly I was interested. I was like, oh, well, I can work with that. And and this is for me something which is formed a very important base of my work, and I would say even more so in this later years, in this recognition that unless we are fully open to embrace everything, then we can't be and know everything. It's actually quite simple, really, and I think we kind of make it a lot more complicated.
Mm.
So I
Yeah.
think this process of actually growing into life, which for me I think is a very much embraced in the tantric tradition, is also about being okay with everything. It's allowing yourself to just melt into um, whatever comes our way,
Mm.
and this is the invitation, I think, in order to discover that tastiness of life as
Mm.
well. Yeah.
Wow. I love that. I love gosh, so many things to think about there. I love how you mentioned or you pointed out how it's also like the dirty things or the unpleasant things are also divine. Because one thing I notice, I kind of observe about Tantra today, especially maybe we could say in the Neo Tantra, the sort of popular Tantra, there's a lot of emphasis on pleasure and enjoyment as, embracing that as a divine experience. But it's also important, as you said, there is also the kind of unpleasant that is also part of divine, and to be complete, to be whole, to really experience the fullness of divinity, we also need to embrace that kind of the darker, sort of more negative experiences of life, and accept them just as much as we embrace and accept the pleasure and positive side of life. So yeah, I like that you're sort of pointing out that balance, that balanced approach of kind of being open to experiencing everything. I
Mm.
find that really fascinating. And then I kind of questions come up like, how do you how do you do that? How do you do it? I mean, it sounds wonderful as you're describing it. I mean, it sounds like, gosh, that's the way to live. But how do you do that? How do you live on a day-to-day basis when we have so many, pressures and stresses and things to worry about? How do you do that harmony?
Mm. I'd like to, as I listen to you kind of, or as I feel you navigate that, I kind of feel like approaching that by describing two different pathways. I think it might be simple to actually understand that. We are living in a plane of duality and polarity, which means also in order to answer your question, I can't actually say there's one path, but I can group them into two two paths, as it were. And one is moving towards, and one is moving away from. Okay, and this can actually bring us into an even bigger debate, which is something which fascinates me, and that is: do I move towards that thing? Do I actually explore it and actually go with it in order to befriend it, or do I somehow detach myself and actually come into a space of neutral observation? And it's a kind of temporary disownership. So they're two different paths and both work. But I think we need to have a lot of discernment around this to know which path we're taking and why, and what the subsequent implication of that is. Okay.
Is that, like, as you're saying, like, to go towards something, is that like to kind of embrace it and experience it, and then to move away from it, is that kind of like being somehow detached, sort of a more transcendent and detached from it?
Exactly. And I mean, this we can talk it in, if we're talking in Tantra talk, we can talk about that being more of a Shakti experience or a Shiva experience. Okay. So what I mean by that, imagine there's something there's charge around it. Something is maybe triggering me. Okay. So I can actually really move towards that. I'm saying yes to that, regardless of the fact that it's what it's bringing up for me in my mind. And when I say yes to that, I can sit with that and I can recognize what that looks like, what it feels like in my body. And I can breathe into that and I can say, yes, this is actually real. It's here and I'm willing to meet that. Okay. And when we actually explore that sensation without the words, without the the narrative, let's say, we're actually with that, we discover its energy. And when we discover that's pure energy, maybe we can actually let go of the story, but we can actually, wow, just really recognize that everything in essence is energy. And once we take away any projections around that, we can actually move that energy, transform it, use it for something else. And this is one classical path that we explore not only in Tantra, but also I think in modern somatics. This is how we work. And the other one is actually just to come into a space of observation. So it's almost like I have this thing in front of me. Yeah. So this triggered one is here, and I am the neutral witness of that. This is the Shiva consciousness. So I'm actually just watching that. And as I watch it, I go, hang on a minute. If I can see that, then maybe that which is so triggering is not who I am. And when that is a direct recognition, that triggering just can go and disappear into nothingness.
It
Okay.
loses its power over you.
Loses its power completely. So both I mean in my personal life, as well as my teaching and the therapies that I give, I actually use both of those techniques. What modern psychology and embodiment coaches will say is the fact that the second option can be a type of disassociation. However, in many of the classical meditation practices, this is the technique which is used. So for me, it's also about really how triggered the person is in that moment, because we need to see which pathway can actually help to detonate the situation. But regardless, I think the integration of either of these is very, very necessary, because ultimate truth is beyond both of these. So it's not that the emotion itself is true, or even this play of witness and actor is it's also the ultimate reality is beyond both of these. So as we live in the world, we need to learn how to navigate this in a way which is permitting us to feel everything, but at the same time not got trapped in the drama of life. Which is why I think using both techniques is very, very important, which is why I combine embodiment practices and really getting into the emotion, but at the same time having that ability to come completely out and say, okay, but this is still on the stage of life. Yeah.
Mm.
So I really don't think exclusively working on one dimension or the other is necessarily, for me personally, in the whole of the years of my own exploration, is ideal. If we're just in Shiva consciousness, if we're just using this resource, we can have permanent dissociation and spiritual bypassing very easily, and I have experience with that. And also, if we are fully into the story, into the emotion, into the sensation, we can also get addicted to that, and it can be a bit of a vicious cycle also. Yeah.
Wow, gosh, I love that. So that's so this is, would you say this is in Tantra, they teach about Shiva and Shakti, and that's what you're describing essentially, right? That the like the Shakti aspect of God or of the divine or of life is a very sort of active, kind of dynamic, kind of doing and living and embodying. This is very sort of the Shakti sort of consciousness, right? And that Shiva aspect is the other one you were describing. That sort of stillness, that sort of detached. You know, Shiva sitting in meditation on top of the mountains while the Shakti of the storms are kind of swirling around and around. It's that sort of balance of the stillness of detached observation and the turbulent kind of living the storm kind of thing. It's a wonderful balance. It is. Am I right in saying that's this Shiva Shakti aspect of Tantra?
Absolutely. And I think that, as we know, the ideal is these two coming together. So we can describe it like, like a circle, which is not a static circle. Maybe it's something which is in constant movement, and the central point, which is still, which is absolutely immovable, permanent. So obviously, this swirl of energy, like a wheel, is this Shakti, this energy, which you can see in life around us. There is actually no stillness. It's like you can't stop time. You can't stop nature doing its thing, going through its cycles. You know, it's inevitable. It's unstoppable. But then at the center of all this, there is permanence. We don't see it so easily, of course, because we're part of this whole Shakti reality, no? But it's there, and it's the origin. So the question is, how can I really have this awareness, embodiment, and recognition of this dual aspects at the same time? Which is why one of the practices that I'm sure you know as well is the Tandava practice. I love the Tandava practice as a meditation practice because it for me it summarizes precisely this. It's kind of allowing that movement to occur, so there's no constraint or holding or structure or planning, just allowing movement to occur, but from that space of observation, of total detachment, but complete presence. So I feel that if this in itself is for me a metaphor of what balanced life could look like. How can I walk through life and be aware of everything that is, just emerging and molding and shifting, shape shifting continuously, um, and actually just really recognize that there is this enormous perfection in that. Our tendency, of course, is to control it, and actually kind of dominate it in some way. And that's, I think, when we get kind of very stuck quite often.
Yeah, it's almost like when it's our ego that we sort of believe that we are the ones who are doing everything in our life instead of surrendering to the divine or surrendering to the divine flow of life, right? That's that struggle that I think as a spiritual aspirant, I feel that struggle of like I have an urge to surrender to God or to the divine and to become an instrument of the divine, but I also feel my individual sort of ego making choices, making decisions, often without, you know, praying or meditating, and just without consulting any kind of divine guidance. So I sort of sometimes think sometimes that where we can get a bit lost in that, and we get lost in what our ego is trying to do. That we feel that we are the ones who need to control life instead of just surrendering to the flow of it.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting, it's like a timeless debate, isn't it? This whole idea about, how much how much possibility do we have in actually creating our realities? And I think it depends. I mean, we can look through so many different lenses, and I would say that in my opinion, and my opinion is, it's only one opinion of billions of possibilities, and also my own opinion might change tomorrow. I give myself permission for that. Um, but at the moment, I would definitely say that I really believe that we are co-creating our reality. And what I mean by that is, of course, life is just flowing and moving in a certain direction. But we also have been offered this possibility of having choice. So I think that we have a certain amount of choice. It's like we've been given a boat to navigate on this ocean. And we've also been given a couple of oars. So it means that the currents are likely to take us in a certain direction. So if we just remove the oars, we're not going to stop still. We're going to be carried eventually. But we have been given oars, which means that we do have the possibility to really, make this journey um, in our own way, knowing that we're small boats on the big ocean once we're in the ship of this body, because that is the human condition. But I really do think that this is what we've come here to understand as well. Is it about me just opening up and just letting divine operate through me? Or is it also about me recognizing, oh, I have certain faculties, I have certain responsibilities as well, I have certain choices. And how can I recognize that this gift that also comes from the divine is actually enabling me to determine the future as well? So it's big, and I think we are, this is what this life is about. It's we're in the school of life, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's beautiful. I love that metaphor that you described of having the oars on the boat. So we, as you say, we do have we've been given those gifts as sort of part of our personality, which is our personality is so unique, right? It's like there's no one else on in the world who is the same as us as an individual. Like, and so you, everyone listening, we all have our own special, unique gifts, given to us by the divine, to be embraced and developed and used in this way in collaboration with that flow of Shakti. And it's fascinating. And I think this is one of the things that really drew me to Tantra is this idea of like, yeah, we can live with both of those kind of poles, both of those extremes, in a balance. I think there's, the sort of the typical kind of traditional idea of spiritual, the spiritual path where you kind of go off to the Himalayas and sort of live in a cave and just meditate all your life. That's a very extreme kind of that renunciation, the hermit, that detachment, and I think there are a lot of people who are trying to live a spiritual life can often get stuck in that. I mean, I speak for myself. In my earlier life, I was very much in that kind of transcendental realm of living life and kind of neglecting, rejecting, ignoring, my body and the sensations of my body and material pleasures. And I was very much like, I have to meditate. I have to stay in that consciousness. I have to be detached and not get angry and not get upset. I have to be, you know, calm all the time. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about or misguidance about what it means to live in a spiritual way, which is what I love about Tantra is as you're describing how there is the both sides of that. There's Shiva and Shakti, and they come together, and that's how we integrate awareness.
Yeah, you're talking about this idea of, retreating to the mountains, the yogi in the cave. And I think that this is a very interesting model that it's great that it's actually being deconstructed as well in modern times. Because, there was this idea that, to be spiritual, you had to live your life in a certain way, or let's say be a sannyasin, or really kind of renounce family life, work life, and live a more monastic reality, and not only in Indian traditions, but also within Christianity and other faiths as well. And even if we look in India, the whole idea of the sannyasin is actually specifically for a period of your life. So we're talking about the fact that spirituality in India is, and in other parts of the world, is actually something that should be integral in your family life as well. Yeah. But the moment for becoming a sannyasin and actually renouncing is once your kids have grown up. And suddenly you don't have that responsibility. You've done your family thing. You've done your responsibilities to the world. And now is the moment to say, okay, now I can retreat and dedicate these last years of my life to another type of spiritual practice, which is essentially preparing me for death, for a conscious death and transition. So what I actually feel is if I was meant to have this monastic life, I would have been born into a tradition. For example, we can see that in Tibet, where many children are directly brought up in a monastic context. But I haven't. Look where I've been born. I've been born in somewhere, and my sanskaras have brought me into this reality, into this part of the world where I have to earn money, I have to pay my rent, I have to, be able to sustain healthy relationships with the people around me. And this has to be where I develop my spirituality. And for me, spirituality has to be something mundane as well. It has to be kind of really kind of intertwined, because if not, there is a contradiction. And we do quite often see that people saying, oh, I go off and do my silent retreat and I'm totally at peace with myself. And, I have these really kind of illuminated visions and, downloads. And then suddenly I go back home and I'm shrieking at my kids and, you know, um, seeing these hideous parts of my personality just kind of like bubble up and explode. So the question is, well, actually, then that work is really not serving you, because the test is, how can I really um, live spirituality and bring it into everyday life? And this is the real test, I think. So there's a lot of running away. There's a lot of running away, and I think that it's fine, because quite often that's how the path starts. Because we urgently need to find that peace. So quite often that peace is about actually leaving everything and removing oneself in order to actually have that first experience of, okay, this is what I'm looking for. This is the nectar. Um, but I think that not only on an individual level, but on a collective level, our responsibility is to bring that back into the context which we have been born into, and say, okay, now I know what that is. How can we actually manifest that here and now? I think the world needs this.
Mm.
It needs it, and each person is a seed for actually being able to make that happen.
Yeah. Mm.
So yeah, I think that also this kind of uh, looking for spirituality outside of one's daily life quite often is also a response to trauma. um, and it is a path, but I really do feel, and I really try and help my clients to recognize that separation, I think we talked about it when we were talking about the Shiva consciousness, is a very important part, because it's like that zooming out, but we need to zoom back in as well.
Mm. And I'm really curious. Could you share like some kind of practices that maybe you do for yourself, or that you perhaps give for your clients to do, to help, you know, get that balance of the transcendent and the embodied part of living?
Yeah, I would say that maybe three, as you just speak, three key practices come to mind. Um, One is meditation. I think that meditation is absolutely indispensable. It really is. And even if it's just for a few minutes, and I wouldn't actually have said that a few years ago, because a lot of the teaching that I guided was long, deep practices. But I feel that on a collective level, there has been an enormous shift, and we can actually dip into that meditative state a lot more. It's a lot more accessible to people than it ever was before, which means that I think that we can actually meditate for shorter periods of time and actually really get benefits, because we need to cultivate a greater quality of presence and a capacity to listen. In fact, a lot of people say to me, oh, what would you most recommend? I would say, well, actually, we need to be able to listen more and to feel more and to witness more, because there's so many people wanting to fill the space and have answers to things and do things and make things and create things. But actually, unless we have the space to do so and the sensitivity to recognize, what should come into that space, we need to create that space previously. So I would definitely say
Mm.
meditation on the one hand. And when we talk about embodied practices, of course, embodied practices are also still. So embodiment is not only about moving the body, it's also meditation is an embodied practice in itself. And then I would definitely say the use of the breath. This can be witnessing the breath if it's a more meditative practice, or it can actually be using the breath to enliven, to move energy, and actually to access certain archives of the body. And I would definitely say the a yoga practice, but I would say there, and this is my personal vision, of course, is that there has to be a space, there has to be freedom in the yoga practice, which means that rather than having some very strict instructions around do this, do that, turn the leg this way, turn the leg, there has to be this space for really observing and feeling within the body. And this is something that is quite often missing in some of the modern approaches to meditation, to yoga practice. And one thing I can say is permanence in postures is very interesting.
Permanence in a yoga posture? Did you mean like a kind of still yoga posture? You mean like a sort of a posture where you're not really moving?
Yeah, so basically, I'll describe that a little bit more. The style of yoga that I practice is we obviously have a more of an energetic period of the practice, which is where we use sequences like vinyasas, for example, the sun salutation, as a way of kind of generating heat and activity within the body. Um, but then we move on to the actual asana or posture practice. And actually, as we deepen in the practice, we are holding the posture longer and longer. And what happens there is we describe it each posture as having 5 phases. I think this can help you to understand. So we have the construction phase, how to get into the posture and find the posture which is stable, comfortable, and the body is aligned. Yeah. And that is the phase which modern yoga has focused on, specifically the perfecting of the posture, which is quite often I'm critical about that because it's about what it looks like from the outside, which I'm actually not so interested in, the Instagram perfect posture shots.
Yeah,
Um,
the
that
fancy
construction,
the fancy
yeah.
yoga tights and things.
Exactly. So I'm interested there is how does it feel? And when people are given that kind of authority, they might say, well, actually, I feel better with my hip a little bit more there than here. Really kind of getting into feel that what that perfect posture for you today is with your body. Not everyone has the same dimensions of their body and proportions. So the same instruction is not valid for each person. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's the first phase of the posture. The second phase of the posture is the breath. So once my body is stable in the posture, I check in. Am I breathing? Quite often when we're concentrated, like, oh, not
Yeah.
even breathing. And can I just relax into the breath? So once I know that the breath is flowing, then as the posture is maybe twisting or it's the energy is going to move through a certain pathway. So I just check in with the breath. I'm not forcing the breath, it's a spontaneous breath, but I'm just bringing the awareness to the breath and
Hmm.
just allowing that deeper relaxation to happen within the posture. And then we move on to the third phase, which I think for me is the most important phase in this particular style of yoga that I teach. And very specific to Tantra Yoga, in my opinion. And this third phase is what do I do with my mind once I'm in the posture? Okay. So, of course, you could say, oh, well, concentrate on the physical body, the sensations, or concentrate in the breath. But here in the Tantra Yoga practice, we focus the energy or on the chakra that we're specifically wanting to activate through this particular posture, or in some cases, it's the actual flow of energy in a very specific pathway within the body. And when I say body, I'm not actually talking about the physical body. I'm talking about pranamaya kosha, the second body, the energetic body. And this is the why we want to focus and have stillness, so that this third phase can actually take us in the body, through the chakra and beyond, to a more expanded state through a specific pathway, connecting essentially with the macrocosmic energy, which corresponds to what I'm focusing on. The fourth phase is the deconstruction, how I physically get out of the posture. And the fifth is the other phase for me, which is vital and quite often forgotten about in most other modern forms of yoga. And that is the observation phase. So we come out of the posture, and that's when the juiciness quite often occurs. It's not what was going on in the posture because I was actually working. It's what happens afterwards. Can I feel that activation? What is that emotional response? Where can I feel it? Is it inside my body? Is it outside my body? And how can I actually continue sensing that in order for it to have a greater permanence in my energetic body? Knowing that everything that happens on a physical level is coming from the energetic space. So the body is actually that tip of the iceberg that's visible, but that whole subtle dimension, which is not visible to the physical eye, is actually sustaining that visible aspect. So really, when we think about each yoga pose as having that kind of complexity, suddenly a yoga practice could actually be 3 postures, no more, but 3 really focused, deep postures. And I can go very far just with that.
Wow, I love that. And so the whole experience of the posture, it then becomes kind of the way of living your daily life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd say definitely so. And I think that we talk about having regularity in our practice, and it's because we actually deepening in a let's say a pathway that we've kind of opened or we've initiated. So the effects of what we do actually are sustained over time. It's funny because that's reminding me, I had a conversation with someone, I can't remember when it was, not that long ago, and they were saying how if during a period of your life you have dedicated some time to really kind of committed practice, spiritual practice, even if you stop that spiritual practice, you will still be reaping the effects for a certain length of time. And I think that that's the same here. Let's say even if you do like a 1 hour really focused and deep energetical practice in this way, of course, without meaning to, you're going to benefit from that throughout the rest of the day.
Right. And that type of yoga practice you're describing is, for me, it's fascinating because I don't think I've ever really seen like yoga, like sort of hatha yoga, asanas in that light in that you're describing. I've often, I do a little bit of simple yoga myself, and I find a great way to sort of settle the mind, settle the body a little bit, and perhaps as a preparation to sort of do some meditation. But the actual yoga itself, the actual postures itself, I've never really considered them as such a powerful, deep practice as you're describing. I find it fascinating. Is that something like, does it take time to kind of build up to that level of of practice? Is it necessary to sort of, familiarize yourself with the postures and so on, and do the kind of regular yoga before you can get to that stage, or can someone just straight off start learning and practicing in that way that you describe?
Oh, you can absolutely come for the first time. In fact, quite often, if someone already comes from a different style of yoga practice, they have the additional obstacle of letting go preconceived ideas. And, the ego quite often comes to play. It's kind of like, no, it shouldn't be like this. So I would actually say that it's a very approachable method. What I would say is that permanence in the posture is a enormous challenge. And that challenge for some people can be more physical, but in general, it's more mental. So it's about that recognizing that maybe there's something in the mind saying, "Oh, I'm bored," or "When is she going to say that's enough?" Or that real kind of battle. Um, and I think that this is something that, in general, we actually need in order to actually get beyond that mental narrative, which is actually quite often taking us in the direction that we don't want to go, to be able to pass that kind of threshold when we suddenly kind of like release. There's definitely a threshold here. And when we release, it's something that's quite often coming from a mental just letting go. And suddenly we come into a different dimension of going, well, actually, I'm suddenly beginning to feel, actually coming into a different dimension. And I think that we can talk about this particular pattern occurring not only in a yoga practice, of course. A lot of us will see it in our daily lives, just kind of coming up this pattern. We have to get beyond this, yeah, these obstacles in our own mind in order to actually get into that activity or get into the flow state, and then be able to go, here's the juice.
Yeah. I was actually
So
thinking the same thing as you were saying that. I was thinking like, yeah, it reminds me of things like if you do like a 24-hour fast, for example, the discomfort, it requires a little bit of sort of willpower, uh, which is kind of good for you in a sense, isn't it? Sort of to strengthen that willpower, and then as you say, you kind of get over that initial challenge where you almost want to give up, but you just go through it, and then you start to feel like quite a different. You feel a lightness and so on. I was
yeah,
thinking of other things like doing workouts and doing exercise and things like that, where you have to sort of push yourself a little bit to sort of reach that level where it's really benefiting you, and then after that you start to feel very different, and you never regret having done it. So just sort of
yes,
thing. Yeah,
yeah. And
yeah.
I think that this is actually bringing us to a very interesting debate, really, and it's something which comes up all the time. It's about discipline or non-discipline, pushing myself to do something that I don't want to, or just going with the flow. Yeah.
Mm, yeah.
Um, and I think it's creates a lot of confusion in in these spaces, because we do, a lot of us have been brought up with excessive structure and no choice. You just have to do it. And we've incorporated that capacity to not listen to our own needs. And this is actually really a form of violence towards ourselves, and a lack of respect around our needs. So, as things generally happen when we're trying to correct something, we go to the other extreme. And the other extreme is like, just do what the hell I want, whenever I want. And I don't want to do this, so I'm not going to do it kind of attitude. But that also brings us into um, a very different sphere, where we also cannot be in the place that we really want to be. Yeah, because we need to have that self discipline. We need to be able to actually put those structures in place in order to get to our intended destination. But it's also not set in stone. It's not like I'm going to do this every day at the same time and I'm going to get to this place, because there are other variables, because we are also within, you know, this Shakti reality, which is very fluid and changeable. The most important thing is cultivating a deeply authentic and honest relationship with ourselves. So we have a huge capacity for self-deceit. We tell stories to ourselves and we justify things.
Yeah.
And so quite often it will be like, I've decided to do my yoga practice tomorrow morning. Okay, and I wake up tomorrow morning and suddenly like the body's feeling heavy. And so it's very easy for me to say, oh, my body is telling me that I just need another hour in bed.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you might justify and say, oh, I'm just being really kind to myself because I really recognize my body's greater need for rest. But how do you know that it's actually not that lazy self, which all it needs is to have a little bit of activation, some deeper breaths, some shaking out. And in fact, you're going to get all of that vitality that you need for the day. Now, this is a difficult one. It really is a difficult one. And I think that this is the place where I can say again, that's why the meditation is so important. It's for us to really know how the intricate workings of our own psyche, and to be able to recognize which is the one who's speaking in that moment. Because, the lazy one can dress up very well as the sage and actually say in the most beautiful and enlightened way, stay in bed. But actually, it's that lazy one who needs to kick up the butt and needs to get the yoga mat out and start doing something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a good point. It makes me think of, like, I often observe in sort of the Tantra sphere this idea of, as you mentioned earlier, like, yeah, we can do anything, but we can just, indulge ourselves, eat as much cake as you want, have as much pleasure as you want, and, just it's all divine. It's all part of the divine human experience. But then, yeah, as you say, it's like, there's moderation, isn't it? It's about moderation in everything, and not to be too extreme, because yeah, then when you sort of overindulge in things and you go on a binge or whatever, it kind of, in my experience anyway, it sort of clouds your mind. It sort of fogs your awareness and consciousness. It dulls your sensitivity to the divine around you. And then on the other hand, extreme discipline, harsh, sort of like whipping yourself with the barbs or something. It's just like that's for most people that's not healthy either. And it's that balance, that middle way that's important. And I think Tantra like authentic Tantra teaches that very nicely, doesn't it? It as you say, it talks about like, embrace your experiences and listen to yourself. And then, and it's that, as you were saying about that, like how important it is to be authentic to yourself and to kind of tune in and listen, and that we have this, that we can have this tendency to deceive ourselves. You were reminding me of the workshop that we did on the Mahavidyas, the last workshop, which was the goddess Tara, right? And if I remember from the workshop, you were teaching us about how Tara is very much about absolute truth, right? And I'm kind of imagining, or I'm sort of feeling like that applies to this kind of situation, like truth with yourself, truth about who you are and what your feelings are telling you and what you really need. Um, does that do you think that kind of fits in here, that energy of Tara in this
Absolutely.
context?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It's amazing because when we did that workshop with you, the last one, I had it was such a fantastic revelation to that the idea of the energy of absolute truth with yourself, and like to not deceive yourself, and that we have this tendency to tell ourselves stories. And I suppose a lot of that comes from our conditioning or life experiences that kind of make us tell us stories that are not really true about us. And I love that idea of drawing on the energy or the guidance of the goddess Tara in this case to find that absolute truth.
Yeah, and I think that this is why I work with these avatars or these goddesses, because we need inspiration for this, because otherwise it can be a very arduous task. It can be really tough being with ourselves, because we see these tendencies, and the more we are willing to see the tendencies, the more we see them. And we would discover, oh, maybe, I'm not so kind to myself, or I'm not so honest with myself, or I tend to kind of punish myself, or restrict myself when it comes to pleasure or whatever. And this can also, on a psychological level, become complex. It's like, having to deal with all of this is in itself can be quite troubling. And this is why, I mean, we're lucky that today, going to a therapist or actually having spaces where we can talk authentically about all of this stuff is so beneficial. But I think that in traditional spiritual paths, why were there no psychologists needed? Well, because there was already within a lot of these myths and symbols, there was a structure which allowed people to work with an external figure, which really allows them to really recognize this is not actually such a personal thing. We're all in that together. And we can actually really work on this through archetypes, through symbols, through stories, through myths. And this makes it a lot lighter as well. So when we're talking about, oh, I'm discovering these lies that I've been telling myself, these justifications, it can, instead of lowering your energy, maybe we can put it at the feet of the goddess, when really, putting it at her feet. Um, and she's got the weapons. She has the sword. She's got she's going to help you really every time that kind of little voice, that little self-justification voice comes up. We can ask her, can you just chop it off with your beautiful big silver sword? So it's sometimes feels a little bit like child's play, but we are essentially children, in the sense that we learn through symbols. We need muses. We need healthy, aspiring, or healthy, inspiring figures to aspire towards. So this is why I work with these figures, because I feel that they're deeply beneficial on a therapeutic level as well, where actually psyche and spirit are working in tandem. We've separated that, unfortunately, for so long. And I think it's the time to really recognize that, body, mind, and spirit are one. And for me, this is why, working with the goddesses gives me the structure, the platform, and the reference and the reverence to be able to do this.
So, just listening to you describing there about the energy of the archetypes, the myths, and the symbols. So, I'm curious to ask you, in your sort of opinion or in your experience, are the goddesses for you? Are they myths and symbols, or are they real entities, or are they divine beings? Are they real, or is it a psychological thing? What is it
Okay.
in your experience with working with the goddesses?
Yeah. This is a big question. And if I'm totally honest with you, and I'm going to be totally honest with you, um, I actually modify the way in which I introduce them depending on who my audience is. Because I'm very sensitive around the impact that this might have. And I tend to just sense into the openness and the frequency in order to really be able to introduce them in a way that's going to be welcomed, because I feel that this is very precious knowledge. And if I talk perhaps in terms which are very metaphysical, some people might close down. And it's not so much about me feeling offended. It's actually not about that at all. It's about honoring something that for me is extremely precious. So I would prefer to talk about it in terms that that person can actually get something out of it instead of just closing the door. So what I will say to you is that the whole spectrum of what you could possibly imagine is held within there. And at the same time, I will also say that my knowledge and understanding of the depth to which we can actually discover the unfolding knowledge of these goddesses is beyond me. Um, one of my teachers is doesn't even really speak so much English, so a lot of the teaching that I receive is transmission rather than academic teaching. And there, I witness and I sense into the astrological and cosmic dimension of these beings. And of course, the imagery and the physical form is for the human mind to comprehend something which is totally beyond and non tangible. I will say that one of the things that I work with in my longer training is with yantra. Okay, so we're talking there about sacred geometry. And when we're using yantra, there are yantras for each one of the Mahavidyas. So we meditate not with a physical human form with her symbols, we get to meditate with geometry. And this is when we actually awaken this more subtle aspect of, of the goddess. Really, if you think about her name, Mahavidyas is quite often described as the cosmic powers. So already when you realize that that's what it's speaking to, we can recognize it's actually something which is also coming from a different dimension. But in the particular Breathe the Goddess series that you're participating in, what I've decided to do is actually really make something very accessible to people who perhaps haven't even considered exploring that more subtle realm, because I feel it's extremely valuable. I think we need our more human mind and intellect needs to have structures, symbols, in order to actually make things real. So it's kind of really a first step, as it were. So if I can begin to understand that there is a symbol, an external symbol who I can have reverence towards, and that's embodying both my darkness as well as my light, then I can already begin to work on a plane that's familiar with me. But at the same time, I am, even if it's not so conscious, bowing in homage to a cosmic force. What I'm able to receive from that, the grace that I'm able to receive from that, is well beyond a simple psychological self-inquiry, which does not have that reference. So it's already opening a door to something which can be very powerful. Yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
not sure if I've answered your question specifically, but I also don't feel that within this context, as it is a public podcast, that I want to really explore a dimension that could maybe be alien or even uncomfortable, or just, yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
even might produce some rejection, in
Yeah.
fact. So
Yeah.
this is why I like to be able to modify my teachings always depending on who I'm with.
No, absolutely. No, I love the way you um, just expounded on that. I sort of feel like, in a way, you're describing it so that people can listen and receive what they're ready for or what they need to receive. I've always felt that spiritual teachings are this kind of very multi-layered, multi-dimensional things where one person can hear or receive a different thing from the same teaching as another person.
Mm.
And the way you described it, um, as I'm listening to your words, and I'm kind of also bringing back to memory the experiences from the workshops that I've been doing with you. And for me, I come from a background where, as a monk in the temple doing pujas, I had very strong, powerful experiences of the divine and the goddesses. But I didn't really get so much that teaching that you're teaching in these workshops about the kind of the symbolism and the psychological impact of those energies. And so for me, it's been fascinating to learn, for example, about Tara being uh, representing that absolute truth. Because for me, it means I can kind of take my experience of the Divine Mother that I've had from my, my spiritual life, and I can kind of cement that into a sort of understandable human aspects that I'm able to anchor onto, to sort of fix onto, and to help me in a very practical way.
Mm. Yeah.
As I said, working with Tara in the last one has been fascinating for me because I've loved being able to reflect on what does absolute truth mean to me. How are my beliefs and my stories um wrapped up in this idea of truth, and how much I may be deceiving myself in some situations, or how much I'm not being honest to myself, and how I can draw on Tara's energy to sort of help me illuminate that. So for me, it's been fascinating. And as you say, for other people, they may relate in different ways to those goddesses or to those teachings. So I think I love the way you describe it. I love the way you teach it because, as you say, you're sort of presenting it in a way that we can receive what we need. We can receive what
Mm.
speaks to us in that moment. And I also just wanted to say, like, I understand this idea of kind of being respectful and honoring the divine and these energies, because I remember my experiences in the monastery, the pujas sometimes were so unbelievably powerful that you would just think like that could just blow away your mind if you weren't ready for it, or it might like make you have some kind of reaction if you weren't ready for it. And I remember my guru in the monastery, he would give teachings, but he would give different teachings to different people. Like the close circle of the monks and the swamis, he would give us, teachings that we could assimilate, but he wouldn't necessarily give those teachings to the just the members of the public who are coming to the temple. So yeah, it's a very sort of intuitive way of teaching, I think.
Yeah.
What
This is
yeah
something that I've also been how can I say, unsettled by in modern times. So when I was studying Tantra originally, there was a lot about this idea of secrets in around the teachings. Like this teaching is so precious that we are not going to give you the next technique or the next step or the next valuable teachings until you are ready for it, until you've really digested the previous technique or whatever. And I really brought that into my teaching as well. And then with this explosion of internet, suddenly it was kind of like, hang on a minute, a lot of this highly precious and when I say secret, it's because of the power that it contains. It's suddenly kind of like just flashed around, and it's been unsettling, and somehow didn't sit so well with me, because it tends to become less valuable, and we also can't conserve the transmission, which has always been from master disciple throughout the lineage. And that was actually for a very specific reason, because imagine somebody hadn't really worked and purified their own ego and their selfish interests or perverse interests as well. Them getting the initiation into a technique could mean that they use that power in the wrong way. So, of course, the master was never going to give that particular initiation or that teaching until they were really sure that it was going to be in the hands of someone who was going to use it well. So now I feel there's been this huge kind of dilution of the teachings, which means that, yes, there's free access. I can like type in a technique, an advanced Kundalini technique, and I can say, oh, this is how you do it.
ChatGPT will tell you.
Absolutely. But I feel less unsettled now with it, because now I recognize that, okay, it's on paper or on screen, better said, and without that transmission, it doesn't actually have so much power. It really doesn't, unless from your sanskaras, unless you've maybe practiced that in a previous life, and there's something which just awakens there because it was meant to awaken in that way, and maybe your initiation is coming from a different plane. But in general, it just won't have the power, or you won't be so committed to it because it hasn't been given to you as this amazing, precious slice of cake.
Yeah. So so does that mean then, what do you think? For somebody to go deep in the spiritual path, I mean, that could be Tantra or it could be some other tradition. Is it necessary to, have an initiation with a guru, with a genuine teacher, do you think?
I think you can go deeper and faster when you receive initiation. I'm not saying that you won't get there by yourself, but most people don't have the dedication to actually get to that same place without having that initiation.
Mm. There's a lot of modern sort of new age spirituality, this attitude of like, oh, but I am my own guru, and my guru is inside me. I don't need a guru. I don't need a teacher.
Yeah, but there we come back to Tara. Who is that one who's saying that? Is it the ego dressed up as the sage again? As I said, I can't pass judgment around that for sure, because within us is the light and is the darkness. We have everything within ourselves. So of course, truth, ultimate truth, and divinity is here as well. But do I have that? Have I cultivated that discernment to know which is what? What's actually who is playing out through my words, my thoughts, my actions?
Mm.
And this is why I think that the guru or the teacher is also there to just actually recognize that and just give you a healthy mirror in which you can contrast yourself against.
Mm.
And we need mirrors, because otherwise we're looking at our own navels. We say that in Spanish, don't we?
Yes.
We don't say that in English.
Yeah, that's I don't know how you would say that in English. It's like
Well, I mean, this when we come back to this idea of, if you retreat to a cave, you are your only reference is the divine. So once you get through the shadows of your own mind, you eventually get there. But when we are in society, we're constantly seeing ourselves reflected in the people around us. So it becomes very complex, because when I'm seeing something in you, I'm also in touch with the same thing within myself. Now, of course, if we both have our shadows and our lights, we have that capacity to resonate on so many different levels. So if we find people who are on a on a level which is inspiring to us, it's because we can see they've done the work. We can actually see their light. So when we see their light, we're more likely to see our own light. So it's about coming into resonance with a higher and a higher and a higher frequency. But of course, we also, our vision is limited, because maybe what I'm seeing is one thing, but I'm not aware of what I'm resonating with that person is something from a different level. And when I say that, I'm also referencing indirectly a lot of the false gurus who turn out to then be abusing people. And in this particular period of time, a lot of that has been coming up to light. So, of course, someone may be attracted to their luminous teachings and what they represent, but their sanskaras is sometimes attracting them to a person who has this darker thing, which also needs to be worked through. So it's complex. It's very complex. And I understand that a lot of people around have fear around having gurus or spiritual teachers, specifically for this reason. And I think that, of course, ultimately, the truth is within each one of ourselves, of course. But it's no easy task to actually discover that truth.
Yeah, absolutely. I my guru used to teach us. You know, he would say, look, don't worship me, worship God. So he didn't want us to be distracted by the human being. He wanted us to go to God directly, through ourselves, through our worship, through our practices. But on the other hand, he was incredibly skillful at guiding us and showing us our, as you said earlier, mirroring back our shadow and helping us to learn about ourselves and how we can, develop. Um, and as you mentioned earlier, a phrase that I really think is key here, which is cultivate that discernment, because that's really what is about, like, for us as humans to negotiate this path of, on one hand, ego, the conditioning and the lies or the deceptions and the stories, versus intuition, divine guidance, and trying to navigate that, trying to find and identify the true path through that, cultivating discernment. It's so essential as for part
Yeah.
of that.
And at the same time, I do feel like saying that making mistakes and getting it wrong is also fine. It's all part of the process. The same way as the child learning to walk will inevitably fall and bump their head several times. It really is part of the process. And I look back and I've made loads of mistakes, and it's uncomfortable, and it, requires you to actually own that as well. But at the same time, that's where the riches lie. And I think that yeah, and going back to what you were saying about having this external reference of the guru, I think that's why for many people, working with a tool can actually be very, very useful, so that there isn't that kind of tendency to latch on to the human figure, because essentially we're all carrying a lot of pain around our own relationship with our mother and father. We came into the world thinking that they were God, really, and there's been a lot of pain and disappointment around recognizing that they are not that perfection that we really came into the world believing that they could be. So I think it's very easy for us to have those kind of dependent or slightly confusing relationships with our spiritual guides, which is why sometimes working with a spiritual tool or practice can be really helpful for people, especially if they're taking their baby steps in this direction. So one thing that we use is mantra. Okay, so mantra is considered in the yoga text as well to be that simple, simple, simple tool which is accessible to absolutely everyone. And in fact, the word mantra means a protection for the mind as well. So that simple repetition can, at some point when there isn't that clarity of mind, be something that could be apparently pointless, suddenly becomes meaningful. And when that becomes meaningful, there is a change in the perception, because there's a vibration which is shifting, and that can be measured, obviously, within our brain as well. So suddenly we can begin to see things differently. And so perhaps that figure or that symbol suddenly actually has a meaning, whereas before it was, we talked earlier about the sword of Tara. So maybe it was just a sword, you picture with a sword, but suddenly that recognition of what that is as a tool, suddenly there's a response, an inner response to that. So I really do think that working with images like the goddesses is quite, for some people, a safer option, because they're scared about their own shadows. They're scared about projecting their absence of their father onto this spiritual guru, for example, and getting stuck into a difficult situation, which for sure will be a learning process. But when we work with these kind of symbols, there's something which is saying, okay, I'm going to test out this idea of unconditional love. or devotion, something which may be alien to me, but it feels safer somehow. And when I begin to get into that vibration and I begin to experiment, which you've spoken about, I know you've practiced a lot in your own path, which is bhakti, then we can say, oh, it's actually not about that adoration outside towards something or someone. It's about what it cultivates here. So we have this, we're in like a hall of mirrors. We think we're doing everything on the outside, but actually it's really happening here on the inside. So when I make the changes and the shifts on the outside, I begin to recognize that it's also happening here. And as you know, the most important phrase we could say in the whole of the Tantric philosophy is what is there is here, and what is not there is not here. So, how can I actually, if I'm looking for God on the outside, how can that automatically allow me to find it on the inside? And when that happens, the outside actually doesn't even matter. It really just loses its importance. So there's so many steps, I would say, into this becoming our infinite self, really. And I think it's beautiful that there are so many different pathways, because we go through so many chapters in our lives, don't we? So we can always say, okay, I feel attracted towards this, and let's see how this brings me into the alignment, which is going to favor my evolution in this particular moment in time. This particular teacher that I was referencing earlier, I think he's had 32 gurus himself.
Wow.
And
That's
what
a
does that
lot.
mean? It's just that complete recognition that every single teaching is bringing us to the same place.
I like sticking in my mind what you a phrase you said, becoming our infinite selves. I love that. I love that. Could be the title for this podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Gosh, well, the just as the conversation is starting to get really interesting, we're kind of coming towards the end of the time. We'll probably have to wrap it up a little bit there. But we covered so many topics that I think, Harmony, I would really like you to come back and talk more about many of these topics. You know, I loved some
Yeah.
of
And I
these.
thought we were going to speak a little bit more about the Mahavidyas, the
Yeah,
10 of them.
yeah.
So we definitely can unpack a little bit more specifically about some of those figures.
So actually, this is a good moment for me to ask you, Harmony. Uh, what courses or what teachings or courses do you have available at the moment that you could offer to our listeners?
Yeah, I've been teaching mainly in Spanish for so many years. So let's say that the volume of work that I offer has been mainly in Spanish, but in English specifically. One of the trainings that I would like to relaunch that's already been prepared in English is my 100-hour energetic alignment training. And what I did with that is I took the full 500-hour Tantra teacher training program, and I just stripped it from a lot of those elements which are more commonly seen in other yoga teacher training courses. And what I condensed was specifically the energetic aspects that are not so present in other yoga trainings. So this is a really interesting course, and especially as you mentioned your interest in seeing how each yoga posture can be practiced, what chakra it's activating, how to actually explore it in a whole different way. This is um, a very interesting path to take. And then we also have the Breathe the Goddess series. And this is really for people who no particular interest in yoga specifically. We are working with breathwork as the basic tool, as well as self-inquiry, and using the framework of the 10 goddesses. So these are 3-hour workshops. So we get to see a little bit about the symbolism. We get to really look at some of the themes, the psychological themes that can be worked with through each one of the goddesses, and we use the body and the breath as our tools. So this is a very accessible route if anyone wants to know about the goddesses. This is most probably going to lead up to the full training, which I've taught 4 times in Spanish already. And this is a 10 months training. It's a lot more commitment. But we go into the meditation with the yantras. We go a lot deeper into the mythology as well. And there's a lot of extra, more ritualistic techniques, pujas, which you're familiar with. And and this year also really hoping to take a small group of people to India to practice fire ceremony, to receive mantra initiations, and to visit some of the temples dedicated to the Mahavidyas as well. So exciting stuff on the horizon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And though the courses that you have mentioned, are they in person, or can they be done online, or is it like a combination of?
So the Breathe the Goddess series is specifically created as an online workshop, just to make it as accessible as possible, also for people who are in different parts of the world, different time zones. But I do really miss the in-person work because I know how rich it is. I like to use, for example, different types of incense or different sounds, instruments, because I think each of the goddesses has a very different personality, and we can bring that alive through a lot of elements which can't be perceived through the screen, obviously. Which is why I generally do a intensive during the summer at our retreat center in Gredos, and which is also why I'm eager to take some people to India too.
That's in Spain, your retreat center in
Yes, in
Spain. Just
Spain.
to, yeah.
And we did end up also last full training having a hybrid option. So I had some people in the shala with me and other people online. So people who live closer are always welcome to share the physical space as well. Yeah.
Great. And so Harmony, where could people get in touch with you or find out more about this?
Yeah. People can reach out to me on social media. My Instagram account is harmony_Hannigan. Maybe we can get to share that.
Yeah.
My yoga website is Nayana Yoga, Nayana. This word is the I and also the inner guide. And I think those are the 2 easiest places to track me down.
Okay. We'll have all the links in the description here in the show notes, so anyone can access there to find out more about you. And I highly recommend Harmony's work and teachings. I've known you for sort of like a couple of years or so, and I just love your energy. It's just so wonderful. You just being in your presence. There's a very lovely presence about you, and you transmit that in your teachings and in your classes. So very, Harmony is definitely the genuine thing, the authentic article here. So definitely recommend Harmony's teachings.
Thank you so much for your appreciation. Yeah, it feels so lovely to connect with you also, and to be able to share this path.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, really enjoyable. And I think today has been a kind of initial conversation because we've kind of covered a wide range of different interesting topics. I would really love to explore some of these topics in a bit more depth, in some point in the future to have more conversations with you, Harmony. For the listeners and viewers, if you've enjoyed this conversation, let me know in the comments if you're interested to hear more from Harmony, and perhaps we can convince you, Harmony, to come back on the show.
Yeah, well, I won't take much convincing because I do love these spaces of just sharing. I find it very fascinating because, as I said at the beginning, we just never know what we're going to be talking about. So that I love the mystery as
Yeah.
well and the magic. And as you already said, Jamie, if the people who are listening to us have, just felt that there's something that we've been speaking about which has sparked some interest, they can let us know. Anything from yeah, embodiment to spiritual bypassing. And there's 10 Mahavidya, so that's maybe 10 podcasts,
Yeah. that's going to take us like the next couple of years to get through that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's
Um,
plenty
and
of material to be working through.
yantras, that would be
Yantra.
fascinating. I that's a topic I haven't really explored much. I would be very fascinated to sort of talk about that, and mantras as well. Like, because I love mantras. I
Yeah.
love chanting, and that's another fascinating topic to talk about. So yeah, lots for us to have fun with in
Yeah, because
upcoming
Tantra is
episodes.
everything. So we can actually talk about absolutely anything,
Yeah.
and we're still going to be in the realms of Tantra.
Yeah, yeah, it absolutely is, absolutely is. Yeah, definitely. Um, so, well, Harmony, is there anything else you'd like to share that you'd like to just
Yeah, I kind of feel it might be nice to close with a short practice, actually.
absolutely
I
great?
hadn't thought about this
Mm,
beforehand, so we can maybe just feel into to what that could look like. Maybe
yeah,
just a couple of minutes dropping into the body and yeah, sharing a space
yeah.
which is not coming from this frequency. How does that sound?
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, let's
Okay.
do it. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to invite you, Jamie, and anyone else who is listening just to adjust their posture. And if you are sitting on a chair, just scoot forward so your soles of your feet are touching the ground. And if it feels good for you, you can just lower your gaze or close the eyes so that you're really coming a little bit more closer to your very own self. And as you do this, I'm first going to just allow you to come into the sensations and ground yourself into this new space, this more subtle space. So just feel the contact between your feet and the ground, and the backs of the thighs and the seat, which is being held by the chair. Feel that solid reference point. And maybe you can also feel the contact between your hands and the tops of your thighs. And just allow yourself to ease into this space by relaxing any unnecessary tension in the body. And bring the awareness into this internal body space by connecting specifically with the breath. Just observing the breath as it arises. There's no changing or deepening of the breath. It's just a simple observation. And at the same time, you're really relaxing even more the physical body. And this is enabling the breath to be naturally more expansive. So you can feel this subtle quality of expansion as you breathe in. And this subtle quality of contraction as you breathe out. And can you just observe? Maybe you can recognize that the breath is operating not only within the respiratory system, but you can feel this quality of expansion and contraction wherever you place your awareness in the body. So that you can feel the breath in the back. You can be aware of the breath in the pelvic floor. You can feel this quality of breath in the belly, in the chest, in the movement of the shoulders. Maybe you can also recognize the breath in the area of the throat, even more subtly in the palate, and even in the brain. There's a subtle movement of the cranium as you breathe. So allow this simple witnessing of the breath in different parts of the body to really just help you recognize the breath as something global, so that you can now feel the whole of the body at the same time. The whole of the body expanding and contracting as you breathe naturally. And really recognizing that, when you're looking inside the body, what you're witnessing is a quality of spaciousness and emptiness. And that somehow the only reference of what is inside and outside is the subtle separation of the skin. And at the same time, I invite you to recognize that the skin in itself is porous. Can you connect with the pores of the skin? And as you do so, just allowing this reference of the skin to become even more dilute. Can you even dissolve the reference of the skin? so that the inner space of the body mingles with the outer space beyond. And there can be this quality of fusion, of cosmic and universal spaciousness. Let's just sit a moment in silence with this. And let us reconstruct the body by bringing the awareness towards the nose and observing the breath in the nostrils. And maybe you don't know that the nose is also the organ, the sense organ related to the first chakra, so we can just ground through this connection to the breath in the nose. Becoming aware once again of the physicality of our being. Coming back to a sensation of weight, using as a reference point once again the areas of the body that are in contact with another surface. Feet on the ground, the buttocks on the chair, the hands on the lap. Consciously deepen the breath, enlivening yourself. And when you feel ready, just wiggle your toes and your fingers. And you might like to bring your hands up towards your upper arms and just gently brush the hands against the skin, just to bring yourself back into this physicality of being. Feeling free to touch yourself, to move yourself. And when you feel ready, even have a nice big stretch. And finally, opening the eyes gently to come back into this shared space. Just recognizing what that's brought up for you. How are you feeling, Jamie?
Very peaceful. Very still. Very interesting. I liked that. I love that sensation of the barrier of the skin sort of dissolving and becoming kind of one with everything around, and then coming back, bringing myself back into this body. Wonderful, wonderful. Wow. Thank you, Harmony. Thank you so much. That was a lovely practice, and it's been a wonderful conversation. And thank you so much for taking the time to join me and to share your wisdom with everybody.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you in person soon.
Yes, absolutely. I hope so. Let's hope that perhaps we can record another episode actually in person. That would be fun.
Yes, let's do it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Great, thank you.